Hello, this is Mike Kramer, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for logging on to our webinar for January. I am coming to you from our corporate headquarters in Troy, Michigan. I'll be assisted by Tammy Norris, who will assist me at the end of the webinar, fielding questions and coordinating that aspect of the webinar. So you can see from the title of this screen, this month's webinar is entitled 17025, Internal Audit Overview and Good Practice. One things we want to look at, start things off, are some words that reappear in the standard. In 17025, 2005, there's 248 occurrences of the word shall. There's also 63 occurrences of the words procedure. In 17025, the word shall means a must. So when that term appears, that is a requirement. When some action or activity is to be done either as a mandatory requirement, shall, or because the organization chooses to do so voluntarily. So in other words, within the realm of 17025, when that word shall appears, that's a requirement in order to fill that particular element of the standard. You may also use it in your own documentation in your quality management system. Hence, when you're stating a shall, that is an absolute must. When a policy is stated, an associated procedure defines how the policy is to be implemented. I have an example here. I'm taking out a 17025 from 491, which comes from control non-conforming testing and or calibration work, where you can see this is one of those 63 occurrences where the word procedure appears. So when something is to be done, you need to look for a policy. When a policy is found, you're going to look for the associated procedure by which it is implemented. So when you find a policy, look for evidence of compliance. This is often referred to as objective evidence. Objective evidence, and we'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, it can be anything which during the course of an internal audit or an external assessment, these are things that can be heard, seen, or read. We're going to look at section 414, which is the section in 17025, which addresses internal auditing. It's a relatively short section, but 4 elements to it, and there's quite a bit of information contained in those 4 elements. So we're going to look at each one of those 4 elements and look at some of the highlights within each of those elements. So we're going to look at 414.1, and this is taken right out of 17025. The laboratory shall, so that's a shall, that's a must, periodically, in accordance with a predetermined schedule and procedure, conduct internal audits of its activities to verify its operations continue to comply with the requirement of the management system and this international standard. The internal audit program shall address all elements of the management system, including the testing and or calibration activities. It is the responsibility of the quality manager to plan and organize audits as required by the schedule and requested by management. Such audits shall be carried out by trained and qualified personnel who are, wherever resources permit, independent of the activities to be audited. So there's quite a bit stated there. We're going to look at some of the key elements captured in 414.1. first thing that's brought to light is internal audits are going to be conducted in accordance with a predetermined schedule and procedure. An example of this can be as simple as the laboratory will conduct an internal audit annually. Just have to establish a predetermined schedule. Other thing that's brought to light in 414.1 is the audit shall address all elements of the management system. This also includes the testing and or calibration activities. And so you're going to be looking at both quality management system, quality related, and technical competence of the lab. All documents within the quality management system should be reviewed during the internal audit. Another element that was brought to light is the quality manager is responsible to plan and organize audits per schedule or at the request of management. Hence, a clear responsibility of the planning and conducting of an internal audit is identified in 414.1. And last but not least, audit shall be performed by trained personnel who are, and in parentheses it states, as resources permits, independent of the activity audit. We're going to look at trained. Trained can be anything from public courses, in-house courses, or even on-the-job training. Second item highlighted on that last bulleted point is that you should not audit your own work. It should be done without bias and with complete objectivity. One thing I failed to mention at the onset of the webinar is this is being recorded. It is something you're going to be able to refer to on our website. We have a link which will take you to past webinars, and so if you have any colleagues that missed this session, or if you want to go back and review it again, it will be available on our website in its entirely, and it is being recorded. Going back to the requirements written within 17025, we're going to look at 414.2, and we're going to look at the elements that are brought to light here. So basically, when audit findings cast doubt on the effectiveness of the operations or the correctness or validity of the laboratory test or calibration results, the laboratory shall, again shall, must, take timely corrective action and shall notify customers in writing if investigations show that the laboratory results may have been affected. So a couple of the highlighted things that were captured in 414.2 is A, take timely corrective action. Secondly, notify the customer in writing of laboratory results that may have been affected. And then lastly, follow-up all the activities shall verify and record the effective implementation of corrective action. It's also a requirement within corrective action itself. Once you take corrective action, and you need to go back and see if it is, monitor it and determine whether or not it has been effective. Okay, 414.3. The area of the activity audited, the audit findings and corrective actions that arise from them shall be recorded. So basically, it's stating a record needs to be made. This normally includes the who, what, when, and where, along with all findings, positive and negative, along with their associated corrective action. The last, the last element within 414 is 414.4. Follow-up audit activities shall verify and record the implementation and effectiveness of the corrective action taken. In other words, what we're capturing there was corrective action fully implemented and found to be effective. And as follow-up audits are expected for all required corrective action with the goal of closing them out. And hence, going back to the corrective action requirements, you need to basically go back and monitor them and determine that that corrective action taken has been effective. So again, we're going to just briefly revisit 414.1. So what needs to be incorporated in the internal audit? States that the internal audit program shall address all elements of the management system, including testing and or calibration activities. So you should be aware, especially if you're already accredited, there's two main sections in 17025. These are management requirements and technical requirements. Management requirements are captured in Section 4 and is primarily related to the operation and effectiveness of the quality management system within the laboratory. Technical requirements, they're captured within Section 5. These include factors which determine the correctness and reliability of the tests and calibration performed in the laboratory. So 17025 looks at the quality management system in Section 4, and then Section 5 looks at the technical competence of the laboratory, the hands-on testing and or calibrations that's being performed. Again, here's a review of the various elements of 4 and 5. 4, as you can see, things such as organization, management system, document control, review of requests, tenders, and contracts, subcontracting, purchasing, service to the customers, complaints, control of non-conforming testing and or calibration requirements, improvement, corrective, preventive action, control of records, internal audits themselves, and management reviews. These are all captured within 414. Section 5, the technical section, 5.1's general, 5.2 personnel, 5.3 accommodations and environmental conditions, 5.4 testing calibration methods and methods validation, 5.5 is equipment, 5.6 is traceability, 5.7 is sampling, 5.8 is the handling of testing or calibration items, 5.9 is ensuring the quality of testing calibration results, 5.10 is reporting the results. These are the elements captured if you're doing an internal audit. If you're doing it for compliance to 17025, these are the required elements that's captured within the standard. You can also look at any specific regulatory or statutory requirements that may apply to you. For example, scale companies may come under the jurisdiction of weights and measures regulations. If you're doing an internal audit, this may be a good time to also capture any regulatory or statutory requirements that need to be met outside of what is specified in the 17025 standard. We're going to take a look at a guidance document and some of the key elements that's captured in this document. This is an APLAC, and the guidance document is internal audits for laboratories and inspection bodies. Again, this is a guidance document, and the external document number would be APLAC TC002. This document gives guidance to laboratories and inspection bodies on how to establish and implement a program of internal audits. This document was produced by APLAC, which is the Asian Pacific Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation Technical Committee. APLAC is an ILAC recognized region. Actually, it's the region that PJLA, Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, is a signatory of the International Laboratory Accreditation and of the Asian Pacific Accreditation Cooperation for both testing and calibration activities. want to look at some of the highlights of this document. As you can see, the title once again is for the internal auditing for both testing, calibration, and also inspection bodies. I want to look at some of the key objectives here, one out in TC002. And hopefully we realize 17025, you have a section 414. If you're accredited, you have to comply with this section. Hopefully you actually have some objectives and some benefit to your company from doing this internal audit, other than company or organization, other than the fact that it is a required element, and in order to be accredited or stay compliant to 17025, you have to do these internal audits. So some of the other objectives is to verify that the operations continue to comply with the requirements of the management system. Other objective is these audits should check that the management system fulfills the requirements of 17025 or other relevant criteria documents. Going to verify those two bullets. You have a quality management system and have a quality manual with corresponding supporting procedures that you comply with that. If you're accredited, that should have been written in harmony with the requirements of 17025. So we're going to look at that standard as well. Third bullet point there is going to check whether or not the requirements stated in the organization's quality manual and related documents are applied at all levels of work. So in other words, you're stating policies, procedures, stating that you're going to be doing certain things to comply with your management system in 17025. So you're going to determine that you are actually doing what is stated. And then last bulleted objective there on this page is the nonconformities found in internal audits give valuable information for the improvement of the organization's management system, and thus be used as input to management reviews. Management reviews is a required element of Section 414. So that's inputs and outputs that's discussed during 414, and internal audits is one of those bulleted items, required elements in 414. So hopefully any information, nonconformities, corrective action that's uncovered during the internal audit can be used as valuable information for improvement of the organization management system. Again, this is a guidance document. We stated in 414.1a predetermined schedule. Basically, it should be conducted on an annual basis according to a documented procedure, and should that each element of the quality management system is checked at least once a year. There's various ways of doing this. In large organizations, it may be advantageous to establish a plan, whereas the different elements of the management system or different sections of the organizations are audited throughout the year. In other words, it may be best to have an audit schedule where you're looking at the various parts of your quality management system, various elements within 17025, and schedule them throughout the year. Perhaps each month scheduling various elements such as 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4 in January, and thus throughout the year. It's a continual process. The quality manager is normally the audit program manager and maybe the lead auditor, and also should be responsible for ensuring that the audits are carried out in accordance with the established plan. There is a requirement. The quality manager is the one that's responsible for providing and scheduling the audits. This is guidance document is making the may be advantageous to have the quality manager act as the audit program manager. Audits should be carried out by qualified personnel who have sufficient technical knowledge of the operations they are auditing and trained specifically in audit techniques and processes. This should be documented in records. Again, if you're a calibration lab, you have various disciplines or testing disciplines. It's if you're auditing a particular test or calibration, it makes good sense to have someone who is witnessing those calibrations or testing activity be knowledgeable in those areas, be knowledgeable with the procedure, be knowledgeable with what should be taking place, and of course some auditing techniques, what type of objective evidence to support your final product, which is your test or calibration reports, what to look for, how to ask, those sorts of things which we're going to touch on a little bit later in this presentation. In this first bulleted item, we realize you have a wide array of labs. We have some labs that may just be 2 folks, some labs that could be several hundreds with different organizations captured under one roof, in which a testing or calibration lab may be one of them. But it is one standard, and it applies to all labs that are accredited to 17025, no matter if you're a 1-person lab or a 100-plus person lab. Again, we're now an organization. The quality manager may delegate the task of performing audits, provided that person is familiar with the organization's management system and accreditation requirement, and possibly have the audit carried out by a team of individuals under the control of the quality managers for labs with a large scope of accreditation covering different calibration or testing disciplines. Again, that should be done by someone who is familiar with the test or calibration and actually come up with an audit team. In small organization, it may be advantageous to have the quality manager actually do it alone. However, it should be ensured that another person is given the task of auditing the quality manager's activities. In other words, quality manager, they may be responsible for the section on document control, corrective action, and records. What it is stating is in this very last highlighted point brought on this bulleted item is that have someone else look at those things, determine whether the document control is current, if the revision levels are current, if corrective actions are being closed, if records are being maintained and retained in the right way that it is specified within the quality management system. Lastly, on this page, personnel should not audit their own activities or activities under their own direct responsibilities, except where there is no alternative and it can be demonstrated that an effective audit can be carried out. Laboratories should pay particular attention to checking the effectiveness of an internal audit and pay particular attention to checking the effectiveness of the internal audit where it has been carried out by staff members who are not independent of the audited activities. Again, this could be primarily for small organizations. If you're doing a specialized testing or calibration, you may have only one person at that time who is deemed competent and qualified to do an internal audit and check whether or not the laboratory is complying with its own work instructions and carrying out the testing calibration appropriately. In those particular instances, there may have no alternative other than have the individual determine whether or not that particular test or calibration is coming under compliance of the laboratory's own quality management system and doing what it was intended to do. Again, if at all possible, you want these audits to be done without bias and objectivity under as much as possible. I'm going to talk a little bit now about on-site calibrations. So when an organization is accredited for calibration and or testing at the client site for the sampling in these fields, these activities shouldn't be included in the audit program. So in other words, if you're doing calibration at the customer site, you're not doing it at your fixed location. And at Perry Johnson, our scope of accreditation indicates where the where you're accredited to perform these. These are at the fixed location, or you're also accredited to do them, to be accredited to them at the customer's location, or both. So what this is stating is you should look at those calibrations or testing activities or sampling activities that are being done at the customer site. Go look at things like handling the standards and equipment. Make sure they're being handled in a manner that's going to preserve the integrity of the traceability of those calibrations. Any special requirements as far as going to the customer sites, setting up equipment, equilibration requirements, monitoring of things like temperature and humidity, just being assured that they're required to be done in that particular test or calibration. You want to audit them both at the fixed location and at the at your customer location, if in fact you are doing those test or calibration in off-site at the customer's premises. Another bulleted point there, and I have had confusion with this on initial assessments as a third-party auditors. Audits carried out by other parties, such as customers or accreditation bodies, should not be considered as a substitute for internal audits. What's that stating is if Perry Johnson, if we're your accrediting body, we come on site, we do what's called an external audit. We're doing the assessment in regards to your 17025 accreditation. That's not to be substitute for your performing the internal audits that's required within section 4.14. Okay, we're going to look at planning. And this is still coming from the guidance document from APLAC TC002. It addresses planning. A audit plan, including the audit scope, the audit criteria, and the audit schedule, reference documents such as the organization's quality manual and audit procedures, and the name of the audit team should be established by the quality manager. If you do have an audit team, each auditor should be assigned specific management system elements or functional departments to audit. Assigned auditors should have some technical knowledge of the departments they are to audit. Audits should be supplied working documents to facilitate the auditor's investigation into document and report the results. So working documents, we're going to take a look at that here. What are working documents? These are, I call them tools. Tools you're going to need to effectively perform your internal audit. Criteria, that is actually what are you auditing? What type of what are you being required to comply with? So a criteria document, such as the actual standard itself, if it is 417025, and any supplementary document associated with that. The laboratory's own internal documents that make up their quality management system. Any sort of manual, quality manual, procedure manual, should be at the auditor's disposal when they're actually auditing activities and collecting objective evidence. Another working document could be a checklist used for evaluating the quality management system. It's normally prepared by the auditor assigned to audit that specific element. In other words, if you're doing the entire 17025 standard, a smaller organization, you may just want to establish a checklist that covers all the required elements that apply to your calibration or testing facility and assure you're auditing everything that needs to be audited. You should have forms. You should have specific forms for reporting audit observations, such as nonconformity or corrective action request forms at your disposal. And looking at planning, an audit timetable should be developed by each auditor in conjunction with the auditee to ensure the smooth and systematic process of the audit. So if you're an internal audit, if you're assigned to audit a particular activity within the lab, should establish some sort of a timetable ahead of time. Prior to the actual audit, and review of documents, manuals, previous audit reports, and records should be carried out to check conformity with the management system requirements and develop a checklist of key issues to be audited. In other words, you may have heard of the concept of a desktop audit. Things you may want to look at before you even go into your facility and start auditing would be any revisions within the, if it's a small organization, you're familiar with it, familiar with the documentation, you just may need to look at revisions, any revisions within the quality management system. Make sure everything's been updated accordingly. Things that you may want to look at prior would be proficiency testing, uncertainty budgets, customer reports, maybe any new employees, perhaps look at their training records prior to going into the facility. External calibration certificates, checking perhaps for the traceability of any standards, and actually reports, calibration or test reports that you're providing your customers. Perhaps review those and ensure they meet the requirements of Section 510 and 17025, excuse me, which is reporting the results. Okay, so we're going to move ahead and jump from planning to the actual implementation of the internal audit. The key steps of an audit are planning, investigation, analysis, reporting, follow-up corrective action, and closeout. Implementation should conduct an opening meeting, and if needed, introduce members of the audit team, confirm the audit criteria, review the scope of the audit, and clarify any relevant details in regards to the procedure and timetable. In small organizations, this could be a very informal meeting between perhaps the quality manager and the company president, company owner. While gathering objective evidence involved, ask questions, observe activity, examine facilities, and examine records. Auditors should make use of the quality management system documentation. Again, make use of the internal documents such as quality manual, test methods, words instructions, etc. And utilize them as reference standards and verify that the lab is stating as to what is being done is actually being done. So during the course of the assessment of the internal audit, it may be very advantageous to have copies of these key documents with you. Okay, I'm going to talk some about objective evidence here. During the internal audit, the auditor should review objective evidence that the management system requirements are being fulfilled. Evidence should be collected as efficiently as possible, efficiently and effectively as possible. Some examples of objective evidence may include, for example, master documents list. This is where you actually list your internal documents, have your current revision status, and assure that these are in fact the revisions that are distributed throughout the organization. Any customer contract, there is a section review request tenders and contracts. Going and actually looking at these contracts, assuring that the requirements are being made. Customer feedback. You're required to seek, under 17025, required to seek feedback both both positive and negative. For example, if you're using customer surveys, actually go in, get the objective hard, if they're being mailed back to you, the copies of the customer survey, review them, assure they're being done, and if they are being done, that the information received from these customer feedbacks are being looked at, maybe analyzed in some sort of statistical format, and proceeding to go into as a venue for improving the continual improvement within an organization and the improvement of the quality management system. Purchasing documents, actually objective evidence, there's requirements about especially critical supplies. And if, for example, if you're using purchase order, is there enough information communicated to your supplier that they're going to ship you or send you or perform a service that is exactly what you need in order to perform the critical aspect of your testing and calibrations. Approved vendors list, sort of interrelated with purchasing. Assure that you're actually look at your approved vendors, look at who you're using. Assure that they've been evaluated as required in 17025, and if approved, that they are listed on the approved vendors list. Corrective and preventive action reports, actually go in and look at corrective action. Has a root cause been done? Are there any open corrective or preventive action? How are they closed? Have they been monitored for effectiveness? So you're actually going to look at, in these cases, hard objective evidence. Just assure the lab is doing what they state they're doing. If they're performing in harmony with the requirements of 17025. Management review, section 415. You're going to look at the management review. Assure you have the required inputs, outputs. All the required elements are being captured. If there's any action items, if they've been established in time frames established for those items to be closed, and if, in fact, they have been, action items have been completed in regards to these pre-established time frames. You're actually going to go and perhaps look at the previous year's internal audits. Has it been conducted as scheduled? Was it done in accordance to the predetermined schedule? Are there any non-conformances that were revealed, and hence has corrective action been taken place to close those non-conformances that was uncovered during the previous internal audit? Customers test and calibration reports. This is what you're supplying, your end results to your customers. Section 510. There's quite a few elements on there as far as an accredited or endorsed report. What needs to be captured? This would be actually going in, sampling your test calibration reports and certificates, assuring that all the required elements are being captured within these records. Calibration certificates for standards and equipment. If you have items that you need traceable measurements for, that they're complying with 17025 requirements in traceability. And you should have supporting objective evidence, i.e. a calibration certificate, to look at as hard objective evidence, just verifying that this has been done. Other things that we'll be looking at is things like proficiency testing results. At Perry Johnson, we require a proficiency testing plan, a 4-year plan. Have the proficiency testing plan testing been done in accordance with your 4-year plan? Or the proficiency test results acceptable? If there were any outliers, has appropriate corrective action been taken? Uncertainty budgets may have some circumstances that may require a review of uncertainty budgets. Maybe you had your standards calibrated by another source with either a smaller or larger uncertainty that's going to have a direct impact on your uncertainty. Other objective evidence, hard objective evidence, could be environmental monitoring. If you're doing dimensional calibrations of gauge blocks and you have strict, very tight environmental criteria that you're working on, going back, looking at the environmental reporting, monitoring is being taken, just assuring that the testing and calibration are being done in accordance with those predetermined criteria for environmental conditions such as temperature and humidity. I mentioned a lot of things that here that you're actually going to pick up, look at, and read. However, objective evidence can be considered anything which is heard, seen, or read, which was evidence in supporting whether or not compliance was met. Give me an example. For if there's personal protection equipment that might be required to perform a particular test, safety glasses, gloves, something in that manner, and you actually seen a technician not complying with that standard, that requirement, that is objective evidence. It's something that you've seen, heard. You're performing an internal audit. You have the work instruction in front of you. You're going to perhaps question the technician about the calibration or testing that's being done. If the technician gives you information which is not in harmony with the lab's adopted procedure, hence that's objective evidence that you've actually heard. It's not hard, but you can utilize that in determining whether or not compliance or conformance or non-conformance have been established. In other words, you're doing an internal audit. It's a lot more than a checklist. Of course, your quality management system may have been written in regards to 17025. It may very well comply with 17025. You're stating that you're going to report calibration or test reports and include all the required elements. You're actually going to need to go out and see if you're practicing what you preach within your own quality management system. And this is true if you're a 1 or 2 person organization or a large organization. You need to look at that objective evidence and ensure you're doing exactly what is required within the standard and what is required and stated within your own quality management system. Continuing with implementation, all audit findings should be recorded and any nonconformities should be noted and investigated further by the auditor to identify underlying problems. After all activities have been completed, the audit team should review and analyze all findings to determine which are reported as nonconformities and which can be reported as recommendations. In other words, if you're working as a team, if you determine that a nonconformance may actually have been uncovered during an internal audit, if you're working as a team, it might be advantageous to come together, discuss the finding, and actually pinpoint if a requirement has not been met. The audit team should prepare a clear, concise report supported by objective evidence, audit evidence of nonconformance, and then recommendations for improvement. So your audit report should basically specify how the audit was conducted, who was it conducted by, what was looked at, any nonconformances that was uncovered. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more here for in relation to a final audit report. Still under implementation, any nonconformances should be identified in terms of a specific requirement of the organization's quality manual and related documents which the audit has been conducted. If it's a violation of a criteria within 17025 or within the lab's own quality management system, you need to have a requirement which is not being met. So in other words, that needs to be identified. Finally, a closing meeting with senior management of the organizations and those responsible for the functions audited should be held, with the main purpose of the meeting as a presentation of the audit findings and report to management in a manner in which they understand the audit results. The purpose of this meeting is to present audit findings and report to senior management in such a manner as to ensure that they clearly understand the results of the audit. Typically, if those of you that's been subjected to a third-party audit by an accredited body such as Perry Johnson, we typically will have an opening meeting, conduct the assessment, utilize the tools at our disposal. At the end of the meeting, prepare our reports and have a closing meeting with top management and an opportunity for us to present and for you as internal auditors to present the findings of the internal audit, both good and bad, and allow the opportunities for questions by those individuals who are subjected to any non-conformance or referenced in the audit report. The lead auditor should present observations taking into account perceived significance, both positive and negative aspect of the operation should be presented. I like to refer to an audit as an assessment. It's not just you're looking for non-conformances or things that aren't being complied with. It's also an opportunity to bring out both positive aspect of an organization, in particularly if they do have a good system of receiving customer feedback. For example, that it be brought to light during the internal audit. It's not the negative, but it's also an opportunity to present the positive aspect of the organization. The lead auditor should present the audit team's conclusion regarding the quality management system's conformity with audit criteria and the conformity of the operations of the management systems. Non-conformance identified during an audit should be noted, and the appropriate corrective action and time frame for corrective action with the auditee and should be recorded. And records of the closing meeting should be kept. So in other words, if there are non-conformance identified, as discussed and understood with top management, it should be presented along with an agreeable time frame to run it through the corrective action procedure. Do your root cause analysis, go through and select the corrective action most likely to prevent the occurrence from happening again. And then lastly but not least, go back monitoring and ensuring it has been effective. We're going to look at implementation. Implementation. We're going to look at follow-up now. When a non-conformance that may bring into question the results of a lab calibration or test results is discovered, the corresponding activity should be halted until the appropriate corrective action has been taken and has been shown to lead to the satisfactory results. In addition, results that may have been affected by the nonconformity should be investigated and customers informed that the validity of the corresponding calibration or test certificate reports is in doubt. So with that stating, if something is right at the root of your testing or calibration results and it's affecting those results, that activity needs to be ceased until appropriate corrective action is taken and implemented. And if during the investigation, if it was determined that whatever the nonconformance happened to be, i.e. you may be using a standard that was out of tolerance, so grossly out of tolerance that was affecting your test or calibration results, those customers' reports need to be looked at and determine if they actually had an effect on those reports. The customer needs to be contacted. The formal corrective action procedure may need to be followed to reveal the root cause of the problem and implement effective corrective and preventive action. Again, often if a nonconformance is discovered during internal audit, it's crosswalked directly over to the lab's own procedure for corrective action. The auditor should check for the effectiveness of the corrective action after the agreed time frame has elapsed. So as an internal auditor, once the organization has submitted you a corrective action, you need to check and ensure that, of course, this has been effective. The quality manager should have the ultimate responsibility for conforming the clearance of the nonconformance by the auditee, then closing them out. Just given the, and this is a guidance document that's recommending us that quality managers has the ultimate responsibility for determining whether or not the audit findings should be closed. Again, we're going to look at records. Complete records of audits should be maintained even where no nonconformances have been found. Should be able to go back and have a record and be able to determine, like I stated previous, and it captured on this next bulleted item as far as nonconformances. You know exactly what was looked at, who did it, particularly positive and non-conforming aspects of the organization should be recorded. If you are accredited, also is something that us as external third parties, assessors to our organization will expect to see as a record of the internal audit and a record to determine whether or not the entire quality management system has been done through the internal audit procedure. Each of the nonconformances have been identified. Should be recorded, detailing their nature, the possible causes, and corrective action in appropriate time frame. And that should actually have a record of these events. So looking at the records, following the internal audit, a final report should be prepared. This final report should be a summation of the outcome of the audit and should capture the following information: the names of the auditors, the date of the audits, the areas audited, the details of all areas of examined, the positive and good aspect of the operation, any nonconformities identified, links to the references to relevant documents, any recommendation for improvement. May have heard the term observations. At PJLA, we currently utilize operations where it's not a nonconformance, but it may be an opportunity for improvement. Corrective action, including the agreed time frame for the completion and the person responsible for carrying out the actions, and the actual corrective action taken. The date of confirmation of the completion of the corrective action, and the signature of the quality manager confirming closeout of the corrective action. Looking at records again, there's a section in the standard that captures records, and there is a retention period that needs to be established. So all records of audits should be stored for an agreed time period. Whatever your record retention specifies, these internal audits should be kept. The quality manager should ensure that the audit report and, where appropriate, individual nonconformities are brought to the attention of the organizational senior management. The trends and results of internal audits and corrective actions should be analyzed by the quality manager and report prepared for review by senior management at the next management review meeting. Any trends, if there's a particular section within the standard that appears to be troublesome over a course of several internal audits, they should be identified by the quality manager and maybe an input for the next management review. And the purpose of such reviews is to ensure that the audits and corrective action are contributing to the continuing effectiveness of the quality management system as a whole. Okay, that reaches the end of our presentation here. We covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. So 1 hour on section 4.14. Again, like I mentioned at the onset of the webinar, this has been recorded and will be available upon our uh, website for review. And if you know someone who may need to have the need to look at it, it will be available as this has been recorded. What I'd like to do with this next, within the next 5 minutes, you should have on your screen a tab for the submittance of questions. I'd take 5 minutes, and if you have any at this time, go ahead and submit that via the tool that's on your screen there. And then at the end, and it's showing, it's about 7 minutes to now, we'll try to answer as many as possible. I will also, if after the conclusion of this, if a question comes up, you can submit that question directly to that email address, webinar@pjlabs.com, and we will try to answer it and get back to you after this webinar concludes. So for the next 5 minutes, if there's anything that comes to mind, go ahead and utilize the tool there. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to stop presenting now, and we will look and try to get to as many of these questions as we can. Okay, welcome back, everyone. A couple things I want to bring to your attention prior to answering these questions. And again, if I don't get to your questions directly during our limited time here, and I do have quite a few of them here, you can email them. Actually, you see my own email down there, mkramer@PJ-Labs. You can email them directly to myself. Our next webinar is actually scheduled for February 9th, and the topic to be covered is method validation in accordance to 17025, how to meet the requirements of the standards when developing internal audit methods. The thing we're actually going to have scheduled, and information is available on our website, public workshops or public training. We're going to have actually a 2-day training session scheduled for internal auditors. This is going to be, of course, a much more extensive overview than was just captured here on the webinar. Actually going to go over the requirements of 17025, auditing techniques, a lot of case studies. And it's actually a 2-day course, which is set for March 14th and 15th. And then if there's an interest out there in measurement uncertainty, and like your calibration folks, even during when I'm doing assessments, seems to be a particular troublesome area for some folks, we're going to offer a 1-day workshop, which is going to follow the 2-day internal auditor training. So if you need both, it could be a total of 3 days, 2 days on internal auditors, 1 on measurement uncertainty. The 1 on measurement uncertainty is scheduled for March 16th. 2016, and these information regarding these workshops are available on our website, www.pjlabs.com, or you can call us directly if you have any questions at the phone number specified there. This training will be done where we're recording it now at our corporate headquarters building, which is located in Troy, Michigan. Okay, a couple questions that I have here. Do ABs, I'm assuming accrediting bodies, perform internal audit reviews? That's not typically something we do. We look at the internal audit during the assessment and basically check for compliance with the standard. Is the entire quality management system being audited? Is objective evidence being captured? And basically, that's done on site. It's not done prior. Another question is, are these records to be kept for 5 years? Standard says does not establish a retention time. There is no specific requirement established within 17025. There is requirements within 413 records where you have to establish retention time. So as far as a requirement, whatever you specify for internal auditing, that's a record. Once you put paper to your form might be a document. Once you start writing on it, it becomes a record. So unless you have may have a statutory or regulatory requirement that you need to comply with, there is nothing specified within 17025 what type of retention time needs to be captured. What is an uncertainty budget? Uncertainty budget is very prevalent in calibrations. Basically, an uncertainty is exactly what's stated there. It's an uncertainty. If you're doing a calibration or a test, if you're providing a quantitative value, it's the best way to explain it. And I say we're offering a whole 1-day workshop on this because it can get pretty entailed. You're going to look at the various various components that go into your testing or calibration, and see if there's an uncertainty associated with that. You're going to identify them, quantify them, and then you're going to combine them. So some typical elements of a budget might be, let's say, for example, you have a standard, you have calibrated. you're going to have an uncertainty associated with that calibration report if you're getting a 17025 compliant report. It could be uncertainty associated with the resolution of the device under test. And when it reads to a 1/10 of a degree C, that resolution is considered an uncertainty contributor. Repeatability. You do the same measurement or test over and over under the same conditions. You may not get the same result all the time. Going to analyze that. That's a component of uncertainty. What training is needed to be a 17025 internal auditor? Again, that's actually a state as far as an internal auditor for your company. It should be done by someone who is trained. So we went over a few examples of actual formal, going to our workshop, for example. That would be one method of achieving training. This webinar we're doing now, we just went through. If you have a training record, if you're attending this, it may be a good element to capture in your own training record. It's actually up to the company or the organization to determine if it's on-the-job training. Myself, as a third-party auditor, if I'm determining if I'm looking at the internal audit and determining that internal auditor does not appear to be familiar with the requirements of 17025, and there's obvious non-conformances that are not being captured during the internal audits, or there might be sections of the internal audit that is being captured which are non-applicable. Then I would say that the training would be needed, that it may be a non-conformance would be written by a third-party auditor to require some sort of training if it's obvious during the course of doing a third-party assessment that the internal auditor was not versed in the requirements. But again, that could be on-the-job training. It's up to the organization to determine. It just says by someone who is trained and wherever possible, independent of the activity being audited. A question here about approved vendors. I have a question about the vendors that were mentioned on the key steps. I must assure that they are approved vendors, and what else? Well, it's easy to have a approved vendors list. You have to list those that you can approve and to use. What you need to do, you need to evaluate them. You need to have some sort of criteria for evaluating. One of the common things that may be utilized is for calibration, for example. Say you decide you're required to use only companies that are 17025 accredited to do a particular discipline. That could be the criteria set forth for putting your calibration vendors on an approved vendors list, and of course, sure that they are once accredited in that particular activity being that you're utilizing them for. Could be things like on-time performance. It could, for testing labs, you may have a period where you evaluate them based on inspection of the incoming product, and after establish some sort of criteria, and hence once that's been met, put them on the approved vendors list. Does PJLA furnish a checklist similar to the template employed by NELAC? Yes, we do. We actually, assessors, we have what's called a working document, where it's basically a big checklist, and it allows room for comments and recording objective evidence. That checklist is available on our website. I believe we have a resource tab that it may be under. if you have any questions or can't find it, give our office a call. But yes, it captures every element of 17025. It goes over every requirement and is utilized as a tool or a worksheet that you can employ yourself when you're doing your own internal audit. If you are a small business, can you audit the entire system once a year, or does it need to be staged throughout the year? No, you don't have to stage it throughout the year. It's basically what works best for you all. And keep in mind, hopefully you're not doing it just because the standard requires it. You're actually going to use it as a continual improvement. But you can audit the whole system if it's a small business. A few activities being done. You can schedule the entire audit to be done perhaps once a year on a set day or 2 days, or however long you think it may take. And no, that's not a requirement. You have to schedule and schedule the various elements throughout the year. This again is whatever works best for you, just as long as the entire quality management system, those elements that are identified in section 4 and 5 are captured during that predetermined period. I have a question. As resources permit, that's a kind of an ambiguous term that's in the standard. I particularly, don't like it. To me, it may be open for interpretation. It says as resources permits. So if resources are constricted, the quality manager should do the entire internal audit. Correct. Well, if resources permits, and the quality manager is technically can do section 5 and section 4, and can do it unbiasedly as possible, then I would say yes, and I do see it done quite often that manner in internal audit. Again, you shouldn't audit your own work, as I know it's difficult in smaller organizations. And the quality manager may be the go-to person, but it is possible to perhaps work some other folks, a master documents list, for example. Have someone else just basically assure that the current revision levels are up to date. Yep, if the resources permit. It can be conceivable that the quality manager can do the entire internal audit. Okay, it seems like we've gone well over our time limit. Various questions here I did not get to. Again, if I've given you the information as far as if you like to resubmit your question if it did not get answered. And here's my email right there, mkramer@pjlabs.com. I'll be happy to reply to them individually. Want to thank you all for, don't have the number, I can't see it. I think we had quite a big, looks like quite a large turnout for this webinar. Hopefully, we appreciate you logging in, again, we're scheduled to do another one next month on method validation, and we're also offering a live workshop here in Troy if you may find advantageous to your organization. Again, my name is Mike Kramer. I'm the calibration program manager here at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. I do also lead and do a lot of assessments. And I want to thank Ms. Norris, Tammy Norris, who's our accreditation manager, for assisting me with this live broadcast. and fielding the questions that she copied and ran on for me. So this concludes the webinar for January. And again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.